Hello, thank you for clicking this video today. I really appreciate it. It's going to be an exciting podcast. We're going to be getting into Bitcoin DeFi. We're going to be talking about regulation on the United States front and some more fun stuff at the end. So how are you doing today, Charles, just to get started?
We're warm, sunny, and busy here in Toronto, man. Consensus is a madhouse.
Yeah, it is a madhouse. I've come the last few years, and I've definitely always enjoyed it. The midnight booth is really nice. There's a bunch of people there, kind of packed house, and it was really nice to see. So really just to jump right into it, the Bitcoin conference is coming up in a couple of weeks, and really something that's been exciting for a lot of people this year is just the idea of Cardano, being the DeFi layer for Bitcoin. How is that coming along?
It's a complicated question. It's a complicated effort because at the end of the day, the consumer experience needs to be super simple. You need to have a wallet where you have your Bitcoin in it, and you have a toggle in DeFi mode. You click the toggle, and then suddenly your Bitcoin can do DeFi stuff. And then you pay your transaction fees in Bitcoin, you make your returns in Bitcoin, and when you're done with all your DeFi stuff, you click the toggle again, you go back to regular Bitcoin. Now, if you can get there, then what happens is the maximalists are like, oh, this is Bitcoin. It feels like Bitcoin. I'm transacting Bitcoin. And everyday consumers know that that's just what I do to do DeFi stuff, and that's all I need. Now, under the hood, you have to build bridges and wrapping mechanisms. You have to get your finality within a reasonable SLA. You have to get the security to be ultimately anchored to the Bitcoin network. You have to build like these exotic frameworks like BitVMX and BitVM2 and soon to be their successors. We have to get Aiken support for Bitcoin script. There's dozens of interlocking requirements and work that needs to be put together to make that happen. And so what we're trying to do is be kind of like the coordinator in chief. And so we bring in a lot of partners like Fluid Tokens and Fairgate and others. And then our engineers co-source with them. And then we kind of talk about how over time do we build this stack up. So the Fairgate relationship is the core infrastructure to bind Bitcoin and Cardano together. So it's a virtualized RISC-V processor. It transpiles the RISC assembly to Bitcoin script. But we're also running UPLC support, so you can write Aiken smart contracts and make them run on the Bitcoin side or make them run on the Cardano side. But then there's also a question of like, well, how do you move the assets over? How do you move messages over? And how do you do that in a way that has reasonable cost and user experience? So that's one big body of work. And there's several opinions on how to do that. Like an alternative opinion is what's going on with the Bitcoin OS people. It's the same means to the end. Ultimately, you want to have a mechanism to allow both networks to talk to each other as equals. Then the second thing is the consumer experience. And so there you have the wallets and the dApps. So Lace is building a Bitcoin DeFi mode. The first step in the agenda was Bitcoin support. We just announced that with Lace, and people can use Bitcoin in Lace now. And we have a demo at the conference where we're actually going to show that DeFi mode and show it kind of working with the art of the possible. And over time, that feature will work its way in, and it'll be ridiculously easy for users to click that. But that's a reference point, and then what we're going to do is go to other larger wallet providers, whether it be the Braves or Bitcoin.coms or blockchain.coms, like large wallets that have millions to tens of millions of users, and try to get them to have that switch as well. And that switch points towards Cardano. So it doesn't matter who's your favorite wallet, you have a path there. But no one's going to click that switch if there's nothing you can do with it. It's just clicking a switch. You have to have apps on the other side of it. So lending and staking and all kinds of things like that. So this is where we talk to Fluid, and this is where we talk to Sunday and dozens of other people in the Cardano DeFi ecosystem. And we say, okay, how do we upgrade your application to basically have a DeFi-enabled experience for the Bitcoin user? And like Babel fees, they can pay their transaction fees in that wrap Bitcoin. So you build the whole stack. And so what we're going to do at Bitcoin 2025 is begin the discussion of the art of the possible for that stack and showcase some demos and show who's in the game and who's working. And the hope is that we can have checkpoints at numerous conferences where we can show that progress step by step. And the very next checkpoint will be Rare Evo. So there, my hope is to actually not only have some demos, but potentially a working life cycle where we can show some stuff happening either on the testnet or mainnet moving through, and then every subsequent conference can be a checkpoint to show that. Now, the thing is, once you've cracked it, it's just a constant flow because you're taking an asset that has no yield, that is highly speculative, and you're allowing people to create a yield and to get better speculative outcomes, whether they be lending or otherwise. So even a very small trickle can be billions of dollars of TVL entering the Cardano ecosystem. The other fun part is that Bitcoin DeFi is very much the same as XRP DeFi because they're roughly the same when you think about functionality. XRP doesn't have a smart contracting layer. It's a quasi-fixed function ledger, just like Bitcoin. And so that toggle can be XRP DeFi toggle, that toggle can be Bitcoin DeFi toggle, that can be Litecoin DeFi toggle, that can be Dogecoin DeFi toggle. So it's a collection of chains that when you look at them, the total market cap is about 4 times larger than Solana and Ethereum combined. And so it's a gigantic market opportunity. So we'll put some of our own Bitcoin in, and hopefully partners like Emergo, who have quite a bit of Bitcoin, can put some of their in. And then we'll just go and talk to the custodians who hold a lot of Bitcoin for people in states who hold a lot of Bitcoin and say, would you like to get a yield on that? There's this DeFi ecosystem that can provide that. So then why Cardano? Cardano's technology is in many ways a spiritual successor to what Bitcoin was trying to do. They have UTXO, we have extended UTXO. They came up with color coins, we created the Cardano native asset standard, these types of things. So when you look under the hood, the way we think about things, even how we do consensus, where we have proof of stake, but it's based on Nakamoto proof of work. It has epochs and probabilistic finality. It's not like a BFT protocol. It actually is very much the same as what proof of work was trying to accomplish. That's why we modeled its security with the GKL model. So under the hood, there's like a natural kinship between how Cardano evolved its technology and how Bitcoin evolved its technology. And our hope is to kind of be like the de facto development framework for Bitcoin developers. So they'll have 1 foot in Taproot, 1 foot in Plutus, and they can live on both sides and use maybe a single language for that, like Aiken or something, and then also build all the off-chain language via logic. So for example, Maestro, they support Bitcoin applications, they support Cardano applications. So you can use Maestro as your host to host this hybrid application, and now you have a Bitcoin Cardano application. This is really going to be great for government procurement. We have this concept we call the triumvirate of Bitcoin, Cardano, and Midnight. So Bitcoin's kind of your value and audit layer, Cardano's your computation layer, and Midnight's your privacy and identity layer. Well, if you put those 3 things together, that's the ultimate framework for government applications, whether it be a voting system or it'd be a supply chain system or identity management system for the citizens, like driver's licenses or passports. And then the politician gets to say, oh, we're picking Bitcoin, because nobody gets fired for that. There's no politics behind that. That's well understood and established, but we all know under the hood that it doesn't have the programmability and identity and privacy required for these types of applications. So I think Bitcoin DeFi also opens up triumvirate applications, and it can create persistent demand. So the Cardano holder will say, well, what's in it for us if it's Bitcoin transaction fees? What Babel Fees is saying under the hood is you always have to pay an ADA for that transaction. But somebody is making a deal where they'll pay for that ADA for that transaction, and they'll take the Bitcoin for it. So it's like a swap. Mm-hmm. And that's happening on chain in this mechanism. Well, that means that the more Bitcoin transactions you have, the more demand there is for ADA inside the system. It's very much like tourism. When you go to Bermuda or Barbados and you buy something, you have your credit card, you swipe it, you're paying in dollars. Mm-hmm. But under the hood, it's creating demand for the local currency. So it's like Bitcoin tourism. They're coming in, they're paying in Bitcoin, but it creates demand for ADA. So this gets our TVL, our transaction volume, and ultimately ADA demand significantly up. And we don't have to steal a single Ethereum user, a single Solana user. And through Midnight, we can talk to Ethereum and Solana, which means if Solana and Ethereum want to get in on Bitcoin DeFi, they'll just simply go through Cardano as the layer, because it's much too hard to integrate directly with Bitcoin. And we have a competitive advantage and they don't.
Yeah, and I see this notion that Bitcoiners are going to be kind of unwilling to use DeFi or Layer 2, and I think that what we saw in 2021 really proves against that. I mean, people were essentially taking some of their Bitcoin, giving it to centralized platforms, and allowing them to lend it out for some yield.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's just like it's a multi-trillion-dollar marketplace. So if you're 5% willing in a $3 trillion marketplace, that's $150 billion of willing. Mm-hmm. So which is larger than the market cap of Solana. So willing is always proportional, and there's early adopters, and you got to understand that a lot of the holders of Bitcoin these days are institutional. And the problem is it's very competitive. And so if you have one institutional fund where they get a 5% yield on their Bitcoin as a dividend to their holders, and the other one doesn't, a lot of retail investors will be like, I'm going to buy the ETF that has the 5% yield because I get the speculation of the Bitcoin plus the yield, sans the risk. So then the other fund's like, oh, we need to get some yield too. So let's go ahead and get in there. So there's a smart cow effect where somebody just has to start doing it, and the rest of the cattle will follow, and that covers the institutional space. But it's different boats to different strokes, and I fully appreciate maximalism. There's plenty of people floating around who are deeply maximalist, and that's okay. And you know what? If that's 20%, that's fine. If they're 30%, that's fine. There are people living in the United States who didn't believe the moon landing happened. There's people living in the United States who believe the Earth is flat. So people believe things, and it's okay, and why judge them? Does that get rid of NASA? Does that get rid of GPS and our ability to circumnavigate the globe with aircraft? No. We can coexist peacefully together. It's ironically, a lot of flat earthers do fly in airplanes, so that's okay. So we'll let live and let live. What I'm worried about is the ecosystem, the capabilities, and then demand drivers can be on a case-by-case basis. And you bring these people in, and it's very easy to get regulated financial institutions pretty excited about this, because ultimately they're looking for a competitive edge, and even 2 or 3% can be a very significant competitive edge. Plus, we have evidence from the Bitcoin DeFi space already, 4.5 billion in DeFi, and I think 18 billion in the totality of all the assets out. And they've only begun this since 2021. It's been a very, very slow-moving thing.
Yeah, and I think the other competitive edge that Cardano has is there's been people learning how to build smart contracts for a UTXO chain for 4 or 5 years, and that's unique in our industry. When
what if your social profile acted like a stake pool, and your followers could stake to you, generating token rewards for you both? What if these token rewards then gave you ownership and voting power in the network itself? Introducing POI, Proof of Influence, a customizable profile ecosystem that displays to the world what matters most to you. A network where its members are validated by each other, forming a community that is risk-rated and incentivized to promote good actors and highlight scammers. A network where you can vote to decide its future and how the underlying technology grows. A social ecosystem built on the most decentralized and secure blockchain network that shares its values and mirrors its design. Mint a testnet profile now on alpha.atrium.io. Complete challenges to level up your profile and receive an ATMA token airdrop when it launches on mainnet. Cardano will never be the same again.
Solidity has kind of prevailed and been copy and pasted over and over again across the board.
Yeah, we're the only place with UTXO developers that actually build real applications. I mean, you can, on Bitcoin, struggle with Bitcoin script and kind of figure out how to shim in an interoperability layer with Lightning, and it's just hell to do that. But with Cardano, you can actually fully realize the UTXO dev model. And the only place to learn how to really do UTXO development is like Nervos or Cardano or Ergo. And I would argue we have by far the best development experience because we spent the last few years trying to figure that out, and I think we've gotten there.
Yeah, and I think that when we see Bitcoin on Cardano, that's going to add some much needed value, I think.
Yeah.
So in our last conversation, we were talking about regulation in the United States, and I think that I've been so focused on Cardano governance. I haven't been as much focused on the legislation side in the U.S.
This is not Cardano governance. This is anal sex.
Yeah. Well, that's been taking up all my time. So what's been happening on the legislative side in the United States as far as stable coins and?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm much more on the legislative side than the executive branch, and so the executive branch acted as a rallier in chief, and they got the legislative side to take it seriously. And now there is a very significant effort in the Senate and the House to pass a law, and they have 2 laws, and I hope to get to a third one that are on the menu. The first is the Stablecoin Regulation Act, which is kind of the appetizer, and then the main course is the Market Structure Bill, which covers is it a security or a commodity or something else, and gets rid of Scary Gary. It's the Kill Scary Gary Act. So the stablecoin bill is necessary because there's $243 billion worth of stablecoins that have been issued, mostly dollar-backed, with 120 million transactions per month. They're basically under the hood real-world assets. They're tokenized securities, tokenized treasuries. And what they're trying to do is create some basic rules of the road. We worked really closely with a lot of people in that, and we managed to help influence some of the language, especially around standards. In particular, we really wanted NIST and others to be involved in creating interoperability between the U.S. stablecoin standards and the international standards in MiCA and other regimes, because stablecoins live everywhere. It's not like you issue an American stablecoin and it only goes from California to Colorado. It's going to go California, Colorado, Germany, and then France, and then Japan, and then back to Wyoming, and then back to Colorado. So you can't just say, hey, we're just going to create a regulation for the United States and nothing else. So we worked really hard on that, and I think there's now a compromise that's brewing. It failed to reach cloture in the Senate, and they did 2 more rounds of tough, bare-knuckles negotiation, and the Democrats added some strengthening language in certain areas in the bill, but nothing significant to the outcome of it. And my belief is that sometime this month, that bill will leave that process, and within 2 months, the stablecoin bill will pass, meaning signed by the president, become a law of the land, which is the very first bespoke piece of cryptocurrency legislation and one of the most important pieces of legislation. The market structure bill, there's already parallel conversations that are going on, and I have some very strong opinions about that are radically different than maybe some other people. And our hope is that we can work really closely with the different actors and figure out a path where we can get some goodness in there. And my view is that that would sort out most of the concerns the industry's had over the last 4 years. That said, it would leave on the table $7 to $10 trillion of extra value, namely the real-world asset revolution. And for that to really come into fruition, we need to update our securities laws. So we need to open up the Securities Exchange Act of 1933, and we need to have a conversation about a lightweight security that can trade 24/7 with a different disclosure regime that's more carrot than stick, and is easy to issue without the overhead that modern securities have. And if that's the case, then you can have tokenized real estate and tokenized IP and yield-bearing stablecoins and all these other things. And that's really what's going to bring the industry to the next level and bring all that money into the cryptocurrency space. I think as we're discussing the market structure bill, it's going to be a lot easier than to kind of talk about that securities side of the house. And now that the SEC is willing to work with us as an industry, I think Paul and his team can get it done. So I'm very optimistic that we'll have those 2 big laws passed by August to September. And my view is that'll create kind of the Giga Chad bull run, because all this money will start entering the space. The Mag 7 will get into the space, and then it's going to be very, very fun for the next 6 to 12 months. But long term, there's going to still be a lot of cleanup that we need to do and get done. But the age of Gensler is over, and long live Gensler. Couldn't have found a nicer guy.
Did you see him go on Fox News? He was like making his rounds. He went on there and he's still out there.
Well, cancer never goes away.
Yeah. I really think that cancer is ultimately what led to kind of the meme coin craze. There's great meme coins out there that have awesome communities that, but there's also, very bad meme coins out there that have just stolen from their communities. And I think that this focus on not having utility, or your security is kind of what has led to this land of meme coins and pump.fun, et cetera.
People are going to do what they want to do. People gamble and people trade and people collect things. And, the problem with Memecoin Mania is that crypto just made it so efficient to do it at a scale that we've never seen before, that it went from a fun thing to do to a moral hazard. Mm-hmm. And, Trump coin kind of killed the meme coin space. I'd argue Trump plus Melania killed it. Had he not launched Melania and just stick with Trump, maybe it would have kept percolating. Yeah. But just like NFTs broke, and they didn't go away. They're still around. They're still useful. But it's no longer the case. You're going to get like a banana picture that's worth $1.5 million, and nobody's entirely sure why. Meme coins are much the same. You're probably not going to have a meme coin launch and go to $50 billion, and nobody knows why and how. It's now more you actually have to do the work. You got to build the culture. You got to build the community. You got to actually try to go through the motions. Like when you go to these conferences, you'll see the Doge car and these things, and you see Doge Nation. They actually have a community, and there's durability there, and that's why they have value, and they have patrons. Whereas there's no excuse for not doing that work. Where we got to in Memecoin Mania is we so stripped out any concept of utility. that people didn't even have any expectation of people going through those motions. We just had something launch and it would go to $100 million or $1 billion, and it was pathetic. So it is what it is. I have a project that we're thinking about that I think can solve some problems for a lot of these meme coin ecosystems, and that's Quantum Hosky. And we're trying to work at how to graft on actual real utility and fun and interesting community into an ecosystem of meme coins. And if we can crack that nut, then I think the space will be better for it. But in general, they're probably on the way out the way that they were for a long time, which is why Solana is looking for a new business model. You know, there was a masterclass of business pivot where they were a patron of FTX, and SBF was kind of carrying them through. And then when he died, they kind of died for a while, and then they pivoted to meme coins, and they got all that volume, and there was retail participation in their ecosystem, and they had a second act. And that was extremely impressive that they were able to do that. But now that meme coins are starting to dry up, they're like, shit, we kind of sort of need to do something new, and find something new. And the problem is SWE does what they do better. So it's really hard to justify if you're a new project building on Solana versus SWE, especially if the liquidity is drying up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they had to pivot to real-world assets, and now they're back to meme coins again. And that's one benefit, from Sam Bankman-Fried not being into Cardano. We missed the FTX crash. He couldn't buy or sell on there.
He tried a few times, but it didn't work for him. He couldn't get his claws over it, and we're like, we just don't like you, buddy.
So what possessed you to go into the rainforest and get bit by a bullet ant? The only time I'd ever heard of a bullet ant was I watched the Coyote Peterson video where he actually had that done. So what possessed you to go out there and do that?
Well, he's like the Venom Hunter or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So the ritual is all about courage, and if you go and meet the tribe and spend time with them, which we did do. Everything about the ritual was they were trying to psych you out and just make you really afraid and get you to quit.
Yeah.
So you go and meet them and they tell you how horrible it is and all the people have died and these things. Probably not true, but they tell you anyway, right? And then you're like, let's go collect the ants. Okay, so that's your first oh God, what am I doing? So you go out in the jungle and you have to find the ants. So you find these trees and you tap them with a machete and these giant ants crawl up. You have a conception of a bullet ant, but when you physically see it in person, it's like that big. Each one, and they're fucking huge, and they're really aggressive.
It's a first warning sign.
That's like the first, do I have a functioning brain? Yeah. Do I really want to do this? So they give you a stick, and they're like, okay, put the stick there, and the bullet ants will climb up the stick and start stinging the stick, and then they have this palm tree tube, and you're supposed to put them in and shake it, and they go in. So the video I sent actually shows the collection. Now, the stick is built in a way where there's a high probability while you're collecting them, you're going to get stung at least once. So you can feel it. You get that taste oh, God, that hurts like hell. This is a really bad idea. So there's the stick. Then after you collect the bullet ants, you have to go and stun the bullet ants. So you have to go and get another plant, and you grind it up, and you put it into some water, and you mix it up. And when you mix it up, you dump all the bullet ants in, and it paralyzes them. And then you have to pick up each individual bullet ant, and you have the glove, and you weave them into the glove. Now, this is a laborious, time-consuming process to weave bullet ants into these gloves. And the reality is, a lot of the ants will start waking up as you're doing it, and they'll sting you then. So you get another sting or two. And it's another what am I doing? This is such a bad idea. Then the chieftain says, okay, we'll put the gloves up on the rack. We have to wait for the ants to wake up. So let's go get some lunch, and then we have a 1-hour meditation period. We're just waiting. So you go get lunch, you're just sitting slowly eating, and you're thinking to yourself, what am I doing? Why am I here? And they keep telling you stories about how bad it is. And then you go and you're just sitting left to your own devices for an hour before the ritual. And you're just thinking, you're just nobody's talking to you. You're just there. And just is this going to be the worst thing ever? Will I be stoic? And then finally you get to the ritual. And you walk down and take your shirt off, which is the most bravery you can ever have on the internet. And then they paint your hands black. And then you get up there, you put your hands up, and they put the bullet ant gloves on. Now, when they start stinging you, it hurts. But what they don't tell you is that it's not the worst part. The worst part is the neural toxin kicks in after about 30 minutes to an hour. And it is like a throbbing fire pain. And so it's kind of like this. Hurts, okay. Hurts, okay. And it radiates up your arm. So it starts in your hands, and then it radiates and radiates and radiates and radiates, and it gets into your chest, and you start sweating, and you start getting the shortness of breath. and you can't get used to it because it just keeps building. So normally with pain, eventually you get to a level like, because I have gout and it really, really hurts, but you can kind of get comfortable with it and you get used to it and you kind of figure, okay, now I can deal with this. It always knocks you off your horse because right when you get comfortable, then you get the next wave or you get the next symptom or something like that. So hours and hours and hours of just building and building, and then it's hard to sleep. It wakes you up and these things. So that's the hardest part, I'd say, of it. But then the next day you wake up and you say, "Wow, I feel great," and and you realize that despite all of these things that you went through, you had the courage to put your hands in the glove, and you still did that. So to me, it was important to do something like that before launching Midnight because I know what I'm going to go through with Midnight because I lived it with Cardano. Now we're a lot smarter and wiser, and we have a lot more resources, and the industry's moved on, so we won't make the same mistakes, but there's going to be new mistakes and new challenges, and you have to really ask yourself before you go down this road, are you prepared to go down that road? Do you want to go all the way with this? It's kind of like the cinematic opening of StarCraft Brood War. It's like, are you prepared to go all the way with this, Alexi? I was like, okay, I'm prepared. And so I put my hands in the bullet ant gloves. And when you launch a cryptocurrency or a DApp or DeFi project with a token, you understand implicitly that you're going to have a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And it's not just when you get bit, not at the moment of launch, but it's going to be afterwards, and it's unpredictable and it's terrifying. But there's a morning after you wake up and you get to see the fruits of your labors. So when you look to Cardano, it's like it's a vibrant ecosystem and worth more than $25 billion with millions of people, and people care, and people serve as DREPs, and we've got a constitution, and we've got a constitutional committee, and people are allowed to have differences of opinion, even if they're dumb. And they go and do their things. And there's independent development companies and all these things. I could have never imagined an ecosystem as large, diverse, and interesting as what we have today, back when I first conceived of Cardano. So that's the reward. That's the morning after when you wake up. And that's what you live for, is that morning after.
Yeah, I was seeing you at the booth yesterday, just waving and saying hi.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of that GTA meme, the "oh shit, here we go again."
Yeah.
But I think it does take some courage. I think to seeing what you've gone through creating Cardano, the trials and tribulations and successes. I have thought that to myself of like, that it's a big task to do all of that and then say, you know what, I'm gonna do it again.
Yeah. And you just keep, every day is a grind. You wake up every single day and you say, I don't care how great or bad last day was, I got shit to do, and there's more things to do, and as long as you have that grinder mentality, you can be successful. And if you lose that mentality, or you get too caught up in the day-to-day and you can't see the forest from the trees, then you need to retire and go do something else. And it's very hard to be a crypto founder. I was just with Brock Pierce last night, and we were commiserating on things because he's been in the space as long as me. He co-founded Tether and all these other things. And Brock he's seen a lot of shit. Poor guy. And he's like, and we're like, you're still in the space, and I'm still in the space. Like, yeah, there's not a lot of us left here, man. It's like maybe we got a mental illness or something where we just love the punishment and the pain, but it's a mentality. It's that grinder mindset. And you just got to go at it, And the bullet ants were, for me, it reminded me I still had that courage to go into the unknown, take the pain, go and push it forward. And I actually enjoyed it. If you see the video of me, I had a smile on my face. And it was funny because I went with all these special forces guys who were like ex-Rangers and ex-Green Berets, and they Marines, and they were with me, and they're just like, man, this sucks. And I'm there like, yeah, I'm having fun. What's up? I'm the fat guy. And they're like, fuck, can't look bad in front of the boss. We gotta be stoic. So they, because we did it 2 at a time. So when they saw I was looking good, they had to be extra stoic. So that's good too, the competitive nature of it. I love the competition when it's fair competition. It makes you better. It's always fun to see when Vitalik does something, or a new product comes out, and how do they market and how they present stuff. And every now and then you see something that's just a stroke of brilliance, and you say, oh man, that's cool. That's pretty awesome. We got to steal that shit. And I'm sure they do for us, especially with Ethereum's roadmap.
Yeah, definitely. There's been this kind of notion in the startup community or the founder community, or even among young people, that AI is going to completely ruin that grinding mindset, essentially. Like, you only have a few years. If you don't kind of build yourself up over the next few years, you're going to lose your ass to AI essentially. And, I kind of get this feeling, it almost reminds me of the way people used to talk about metaverse in 2021, where like we're all going to live in a metaverse. And, I, who'd played, probably too much video games growing up, was like, there's no way. Metaverse, the technology isn't there for us to live in a meaningful metaverse yet, right? And I'm kind of getting that feeling about AI, but you run a large tech company. I mean, you would know more about this, I think, than many. Like, do you kind of see that coming on a 3 to 5 year timeline where it really is going to be harder for software developers or young people to kind of find a career path because of AI and how fast it's growing? Or is this kind of it's a real thing, but it's still kind of being a fad, essentially?
It depends on your mindset. And I think this is the difference between Stoicism and virtue ethics and this woke nonsense that's kind of propagated through the universities. If you're a Stoic person, what you do is you say, whatever challenge comes my way, I have this internal resilience and fortitude where I'm going to figure out how to reconstruct myself and rebuild myself to be resilient and thrive in that new environment.
Yeah.
You can't predict the wind. Volcano blasts happen. The sea people come and invade you if it's the Bronze Age. Bad stuff happens all the time. Management changes too. You go from a republic to a dictatorship, or perhaps back. Just think about people living in Poland in 1938 and how much change occurred over their lives in just a 10-year spread. Get invaded by the Nazis, fight World War II, and then just when they think they're out of it, the communists take over the country. It's really hard. So you can't predict the wind. And if you're Stoic, you say, well, what do I need to know to thrive in this new environment? In some cases, you have to leave the environment, go to a different environment. Other cases, you can stay in the environment, but the things you do, how you act, what you say, you have to grow, adapt, and change. This woke mindset is like, you're owed stuff. You're owed a job. You graduated from college, so you are owed a job. Well, if your job is no longer relevant to the economy, then no one's going to hire you. And so I would get terrified of AI if I didn't understand how to use AI to augment myself and make myself better and grow with it. And so I always say it's aug or agents. You got to understand what side you're on. Agents, you're replaced. Aug, you're augmented. You become better. So as an entrepreneur, for example, it's like, oh, well, I got to get this stuff. Well, okay, as an entrepreneur, you have a business strategy. You have a business plan. If you're creating a product requirements document, technical requirements document, architecture diagrams, all these things. For the first time in your life, you have somebody at the skill of a senior engineer at Google, a senior product manager at Google, a senior business strategist at Stanford at your disposal for basically free or near free. So whenever you write any of these documents, you can share it with them, act as a referee, and it's going to help you for hundreds of hours, if necessary, modify and manipulate your plans to get to a really good point. Had I had this at the beginning of Cardano, we wouldn't have had any of these governance problems, because I would have shared the governance documents and said, this is what I want and this, that, and it would have been like, well, maybe you should write that down in a contract, you dumb fuck. And I'm like, yeah, I probably should have done that. And then suddenly we'd all love the Cardano Foundation, and these types of things. But I didn't do it because I was in my 20s and I'd never done anything at this scale before, and I didn't have good mentors, and we didn't have any money. I only had $200,000 to basically do everything that I could do in my power, and I was punching above my weight and just trying as hard as I could to keep my neck above the water. Well, the entrepreneurs now have not only all these capabilities, but not only that, those capabilities will evolve in the next 3 to 5 years with agentic workflows, with tools and long-term memory and infinite context to be able to write the code for them as well. So you don't have to necessarily be the world's most technical person, because this is this myth of the technical person where we have this engineerocracy where your value as a person in Web3 is whether you can write code or not, and you're worthless and scum if you don't have a GitHub repo and have 4,000 commits and you've contributed 200 open source projects and all this other stuff. Well, now through vibe coding, you can build the beta of your product, get it before consumers play around with it rather quickly. And people are like, oh, vibe coding will never work. Well, Microsoft is writing 30% of all their new code with vibe coding. Google, 25%. These are two of the most elite engineering organizations in the world. Microsoft kind of invented the modern software engineer. They've been around for 50 years. So yeah, it's a thing, and it doesn't matter if it takes 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. There's an inevitability behind this paradigm.
Yeah.
And then people say, well, doesn't that mean like the whole economy will collapse? Well, did the whole economy collapse when we stopped sending handwritten letters to each other and emailed each other? No, you just changed the way you think, act, and work, and you change the way your environment works. And so if you have a proactive virtue mindset where you're very stoic and you say, you know what, I need to upgrade myself, I need to change, I need to figure out what are the new job skills here, I need to figure out how to use these types of things. And the other thing is it forces you to emphasize relationships. The woke people, they're like, no one likes each other, everybody's racist, everybody's evil, everything's hierarchical and power-based, and everyone's out to get you and screw you and steal from you. If you're in a stoic world, because the world is chaotic, when the world is chaotic, you don't think of yourself as an island. You say, I live in an ecosystem of people. So what I'm going to do is focus on family and friendships, and I'm going to focus on relationships and build those things up so that when bad things happen, they happen to us together, as opposed to me, I. It's we and us. And so that's the other thing, is that AI is returning that it's actually giving us our humanity back, because we realize the only way we're going to get through this is if we as people come together and start working together as communities and talk to each other, understand each other, and work with each other, and actually have mutual empathy for each other. So I do believe that's going to help, because that's going to be the most scarce thing. It used to be you need to find a person to talk to. Now everybody has somebody to talk to. Everybody's going to have an AI girlfriend or boyfriend. Everybody's going to have an AI friend, you know? And so there's no scarcity in connection and conversation. The scarcity is in human connection and conversation. That in itself is a resource that will be quite valuable. So the people who are able to adapt to that new order and connect to it and thrive within it, I think they're going to do quite well in this new economy.
Yeah, it's it's really interesting to see. I really do like the fact that you can kind of just put something out in front of users and get feedback almost immediately, from vibe coding. And I have a cousin actually who just graduated, and he's really worried about it. But that's kind of the advice that I gave of you can look at it as a good or a bad thing,
Right.
and usually if you look at it in the good perspective, you ultimately in the long run will end up in a better place, I
Right,
think.
right.
But thank you for doing this podcast today. I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you guys for listening. If you enjoyed it, make sure you click the like button, leave a little comment down below to let us know you made it to the end. And thank you, Charles.
Been a lot of fun. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. How was